When do I know I'm Spider-Man? You won't. That's all it is, Miles. A leap of faith.
Like, what's up, danger? Like, what's up, danger?
When you adapt something into a movie, you need to hire the right people for the job. It is up to the producer to decide who's gonna direct and who's gonna write the movie. Which is why it's very important to have ambition on such a project. And to understand the source material as well. Today, I'm gonna talk about the film producer and the businessman Avi Arad, who is known for adapting such Marvel characters into movies and TV shows, mostly animation, and for being the head of the toy company Toy Biz. Arad is a very influential businessman who knows how to get what he wants. Arad can give life to something big. However, like many greedy businessmen, he can also be the cause of its downfall. Today, I'm gonna talk about the ways that Avi Arad can ruin a movie. First of all, I apologize for my English. I'm still working on it. And this breakdown has no basis in comic book knowledge. I don't read much comic books, and I don't know how the industry works either. And this breakdown will be only about movies. And also, I warn you about the incoming of spoilers. As I mentioned before, when you adapt something to a movie, you need an ambition. And unfortunately, Arad has no ambition. The only thing he has in mind is how he can make a profit. Look at the first Daredevil, for instance. The movie didn't go anywhere. He just made it to capitalize on the success of the previous Marvel movies at the time, such as the X-Men and the Spider-Man. And the same goes to the movies that came after, such as Electro, the first Fantastic Four, and even the Ghost Rider. Although I gotta admit the movie was a guilty pleasure, but still, I hate to see such a potential being wasted like that. And all for the sake of toy sales. And that's why he makes these movies the way he does, just to sell toys. And it's not only Marvel movies, he's also responsible for the failure of the Ghost in the Shell. I mean, just by seeing his name on the credits is enough reason for a movie to fail. But of course, there are exceptions. As I mentioned before, Arad is a very influential businessman. When the first Marvel projects came to life in the 90s, he was responsible for financing these projects. And that's all he can do. He's going to finance something. When you see his name on the credits as an executive producer, then chances are the movie might succeed. But if you see him receiving the credit as a main producer, the chances for the movie to succeed are very small. Such was the case with X-Men The Last Stand. On the first two movies, Arad was working only as an executive producer. And once he stepped in the third movie as a main producer, it resulted in a story with too many characters filling a very limited runtime. But there are also exceptions. As I spoke before, you must hire the right people for the job. And while Arad can secure the finance of a movie, he cannot produce it. He needs someone else to work with him as a producer. That's why the first Iron Man became what we know and love. Because Kevin Feige was there. Because Feige knew exactly what to do. Because he had an ambition. Something Arad will never be able to have. And the same thing goes to the Incredible Hulk. At least until Disney came along and told him to tone down. Turn the character into a satire of himself.
Jesus, that's him. It's Blade. It's the Daywalker.
When the first Blade came out, it changed everything. It gave the confidence the other studios needed to make more superhero movies. At least the ones based on Marvel characters. With Arad only working as executive producer. And after seeing how much money the first Spider-Man made, that Arad decided to step in the sequel as a main producer. But hear me out. There was one person that made a big difference for Spider-Man at the time, and her name was Laura Ziskin. She worked as a producer for the first Spider-Man, and then she worked in the sequel, this time with Arad. And then she worked on Spider-Man 3, also with Arad. But this time, because of him, because he forced Sam Raimi to include Venom, that the movie was completely destroyed. But then, a couple of years later, the franchise was rebooted with The Amazing Spider-Man, with Laura Ziskin and Avi Arad returning as producers. But here's the sad thing. In 2011, during the production of the movie, Laura Ziskin died of cancer. And without her, Arad could run the franchise. Now having more control, he could make a few calls on his own. But even before that, he was already causing enough damage for the movie. For instance, adding the lizard on the story, which was not a good idea. I mean, the character was really well developed and very convincing too, considering all the CGI involved. But still, it was a really bad decision, considering the movie wanted to make a Batman Begins approach with a grittier and more grounded tone. And by adding the lizard, this approach was completely tossed away. I mean, I love how Mark Webb handled the movie, using as much practical effects as he could. So much that it made the feeling of being Spider-Man look more real. Something that had been missing a lot in the MCU. But again, adding a completely surrealistic villain goes against everything the movie was trying to do. And not to mention the whole story arc involving Peter's parents that was completely shoehorned. Because they wanted to retell the origin story by killing Uncle Ben again and then introduce the lizard, and the movie basically went nowhere. But then they decided to bring back the whole mystery behind Peter's parents on the post-credits scene for the sake of sequel baiting. I mean, it couldn't be a lot better if the whole story was about Peter's parents. Although it was cool to have Peter chasing down the guy who killed Uncle Ben. But then it was overshadowed by the whole lizard story. It was one story that was overshadowed by another story that was overshadowed by another story. And because of all these twists and turns, the movie went nowhere. And then came The Amazing Spider-Man 2, this time without Laura Ziskin. This time, Avi Arad was completely in charge of the movie. He could do basically whatever he wanted. Even if that meant making the same mistakes he made with Spider-Man 3. I mean, he had no idea what he was doing, as evident by the countless deleted scenes that could have made a big difference. He was just trying to replicate the MCU formula by trying to extend the universe, by teasing more sequels and spin-offs, but in the end, they never came. Once again, the movie went nowhere. And the marketing was very misleading. It basically lied to us. First, there was the Rhino, who was marketed as one of the main villains, but he was only introduced in the end. And then the trailer tried to tell us that the story was going to be about Peter's parents, that secrets would be revealed. But almost nothing was revealed. The movie was so overloaded with subplots that they overshadowed what was supposed to be the main plot. Once again, letting that to be concluded only in the sequel. But once again, I wanted to highlight Mark Webb's approach. Without him, this movie would have been nothing. Really. All he was trying to do was to make the movie more enjoyable. People should not blame him for the failure of this franchise. It's all Avi Arad's fault.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
Greed is for amateurs.
Greed is right. Greed works.
When the first Venom was announced, I was already skeptical, mostly for seeing Arad's name on the credits. And my best hope was for Amy Pascal to do something about it, something Laura Zinsky would do. And despite knowing she was one of the producers behind the 2016 Ghostbusters, I tried to have hope. But when they announced the movie was gonna have a PG-13 rating instead of an R rating, I saw all hope was lost, that she didn't make any difference. And I'm not gonna lie, the movie turned out to be a guilty pleasure, but it could have been so much more. More than something that simply dodged the bullet. Look at Into the Spider-Verse, for instance. Phil Lord and Chris Miller gave real passion to the project, so much that they gave us something completely new and unique. And while Avi Arad was there, Phil Lord and Chris Miller were the ones with actual control over the movie. And they got an Oscar for this. And that makes me wonder if these two could be the solution for Sony's live-action Marvel movies. Because one of Arad's many weaknesses is that he is too afraid to take risks. When he is in charge, he wants to play safe. He wants a PG-13 rating, he wants famous actors just because they're famous, and a simple story that can end up being shallow. Which can also be caused by a very poor choice of screenwriters. The first Daredevil was made by one of the writers from the 1998 Jack Frost. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 had some of the writers from the first Transformers. Ghost in the Shell also had one writer from many Transformers. Venom had one writer from The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and one writer from 50 Shades of Grey. And the new Morbius have the same writers from Gods of Egypt. And just so you can have an idea of how the right producers can make a difference, the first Spider-Man was made by the same writer from the first Jurassic Park. Spider-Man 2 had an Oscar-winning writer from the 1977 Julia and 1980 Ordinary People. And in The Amazing Spider-Man, despite the problems caused by Avi Arad, had a very solid screenplay, which was not only made by Alvin Sargent, but also made by the writer from the Harry Potter saga and the writer from the Zodiac. Just to clarify, this breakdown is my interpretation. People can have different thoughts on different things. And from the way I see, his movies fail because he doesn't take risks, because of bad writers, and he can either add too many characters or pick up the wrong ones. So how can you know if a movie is gonna fail? For that, you need to look into the credits and see if Arad is one of the main producers, and find out who the writers are. And how can you know if a movie might succeed? For that, you need to see whether if Arad is an executive producer or who else is producing the movie with him. Such was the case with Kevin Feige, Laura Zinsky, and Phil Lord and Chris Miller. Unfortunately, despite everything, Arad has no signs of slowing down. He still wants to adapt more Marvel movies for Sony, as well as more anime movies. But right now, he's venturing to video game movies, with Uncharted being his first work, done by the same writers from Men in Black International.